Welcome back to the How to Podcast series. Dave here with you. Great to be back. I want to talk a little bit about interviewing guests here on the podcast and give a little bit of tips, little suggestions. I'm doing a lot of interviews lately for my other podcasts, so I thought I'd share a few things with you here on the podcast. So here we go. Some basic interview tips for you as a host in dealing with your guests. Having great guests on a podcast can make all the difference in the world for your podcast, for your audience, for you as you're creating content on a regular basis to serve your audience. Guests bring with them wisdom and knowledge. They're subject matter experts. They have life experience to draw from. Guests are just wonderful people to meet when you can meet the right guests. I think the one thing you need to keep in mind as you plan out your guests on your podcast is to make sure that you have guests that suit your audience and guests that will bring value to your listeners. So most recently, I've been interviewing guests for my other podcasts, which you've probably heard me mention about already, but one of them in particular, Living the Next Chapter, is a podcast where I interview authors. And I have been doing a lot of interviews lately. I found a couple good guest groups on Facebook where you can post and ask for guests to be on your show. And I've found some really good connections. And from there, what I love to do is when I have a great experience with a guest is I ask if they can connect me with another guest that they feel would be a good connection for the podcast. And on top of that, I have a website, which is not just my player website where you can listen to podcast episodes, but an actual episode, like an actual website for my podcast with a domain name and everything. I built this myself. It's not very difficult. Please don't worry. It's not hard. And I put a Calendly link into my website so people that go to my site and are interested can actually just connect with me straight from my website, look into my calendar and set up time. And you know what? It's working. And that is exciting because I'm not out there chasing down guests, convincing people to come on the show. And my show is relatively new, only several months old. And I've actually had to increase the amount of uploads time on my hosting site because I have more interviews than I have release time. So I've actually had to go up a level and increase my payment, but been able to put out almost 2 podcasts a week in a very short amount of time. I'm up to close to 60 podcasts that are recorded, edited, sitting in a file folder ready to go up because the guests don't stop coming. So what is the trick? What is the way to keep the guests coming from a host point of view? What I love to do with my guests is I always have a pre-interview. The reason for this is I get to check out their audio, video setup without even asking. I can hear and see them, see if there's any potential issues and address them. Loud noises, pets, fans in the background. Am I talking to them in a local cafe with people walking by? That's happened. So I get to see and hear them in advance. Pre-interviews are great. If you show up for an interview the day of, never met them before, and hit record, I think it's harder to build that bridge between guest and host. So I always prefer to have pre-interviews. The thing about having a guest on is I've had many guests on. I have 0 questions written down for them. Nothing. Nothing at all. I have a blank sheet of paper in front of me. While we're talking, and because I've had a pre-interview and I've done my homework, I've looked at their websites, I've checked out their book reviews. I've heard them on other podcasts. I always come with some knowledge already about my guest. I use my Calendly calendar where I can add notes. So anything I find a good link or I find an article or something about them, I just put the links in all my Calendly notes for my meeting. So they're all in one spot. And then I use those notes for my show notes in the future. Copy, paste. Save some time. I love coming to a podcast with genuine curiosity as a host instead of a list of questions. I don't like to have a podcast where I feel like I'm constrained to answer the next question, or as a host that I've asked a question and I'm just waiting to ask my next one without really listening to my guest. There has been times, even today when I was recording with somebody and they made mention of something and I let them finish their thought completely. I'd written it down just kind of off camera, and I came back to them and said, now you mentioned this earlier. Why is that particular thing important to you? And you could see them just pause for a second because maybe they didn't realize they said it or how impactful what they said really meant to my audience. But they went deeper on the topic and was able to expound on why they used that illustration in their previous comment, but they were able to expand on it and explain why it was important to them, which led to a completely different conversation. I love, and this might take time, I love how a conversation naturally happens. That's not forced, that's not contrived, or feels like it's fake. And I've been listening to some other podcasts, and what they do is they do an interview and then they chop it up, do voiceovers, and you don't get the conversation feel. You get the edited, super edited podcast, which is super polished and and well done, like well done from a promotion side. But you lose the interaction between the host and the guest. You miss the little subtle chuckles or affirmations that happen in the background while someone's speaking. It's all edited out and it just feels kind of canned. So as they are great quality and a bite-sized pieces and well produced, sometimes maybe just a little overproduced, I love the conversation as it happens, captured in a moment in time. And we go places that maybe the guest wasn't anticipating without it being awkward. We create a space. So as a host, I love to come organized to my interviews. I love to come with a blank sheet of paper in most cases. I come with genuine curiosity about my guest. I've done my homework. I've had a pre-interview. And I'm looking to my guest to fill in the gaps. So I've done my research. My guest is the expert on their topic, but my audience knows nothing about any of the research I've done. They know nothing about my guest. So I need to bridge the gap between my expert guest, my knowledge, and my audience's lack of knowledge. And I fill in the gaps for the person that's listening. So if something's mentioned or a acronym is mentioned and it's not fully explained, maybe a story is half told, my job as the host is to fill in the gaps so that my audience member walks away from this podcast going, wow, that was a really great interview. And the one thing I've been hearing quite often with my guests is when those questions come up out of a natural curiosity, my guests have been responding with, that is the best question I've ever heard. Or I've never been asked that before on every podcast I've ever been on. Wow, where did that question come from? And I'm getting this feedback from my guests because I'm genuinely interested in what they're talking about. It helps me as a host, and I think it brings a level of authenticity to the podcast so that my listeners, my guest, and myself are all part of the conversation. So as a host, I know it might feel comfortable and safer to come with a list of 5 questions. I get that. And if you're starting out and you need that, then you need that. No one's going to post any kind of shade on you for using what works for you. But my challenge is to you today is to maybe the next podcast interview, you go with 4 questions and 3 and 2 and 1. And work your way out of the written questions and scripted answers and get to the heart of the guest. Because I think once you uncover that, you're going to provide an interview to a podcast guest who does multiple podcasts or an expert who speaks to multiple people in big rooms on stages, you get past the facade, you get past the already answered questions, and you get to go somewhere with your guests that maybe they haven't gone before. In my pre-interview questions, what I love to say to my guest, my potential guest, is, now I know you've been on podcasts, I know you've done interviews. Is there something that you have wanted to talk about in the past or go deeper on, subject matter-wise, that other podcasts haven't let you do yet? Is there something that you haven't been able to talk about that would serve you and promote what you're promoting or promote your brand, that I can be helpful and I can lead the conversation in a way that helps fill in the gaps? Because the last thing I want to do as a podcast host is duplicate the last 5 podcasts that this person has been on. I want to give them a unique opportunity to go somewhere maybe they haven't been able to go. And I would say that 99% of the people that I've mentioned that to are shocked and are excited that they have a chance to talk about something that they've never had a chance to talk about. So as a podcast host, you have your podcast, you have your audience, you have a guest. How can you connect the 3 so that you have a great conversation and your audience walks away with something that's uniquely theirs? Always have the 3 people in mind when you hit record: yourself, your guest, and your listener. And if you do that, you will get more comfortable. You will lose the scripted questions, and you'll get to the heart of a great interview with a great guest. If you are looking for someone to practice interviewing with, you're new, you have your scripted questions, and you want to go a little bit deeper, or you want to gain some experience interviewing somebody, even if you never use the episode, I would love to jump on a Zoom call with you and let you be the interview. I will be your guest. Let's practice. Let's try a few things. And let's see if we can help together build up your confidence as a podcast host. I'm willing to do this. You can reach out to me, and I would love to do a 15, 20, 30-minute interview with you. And at the end, and we'll end up, depending on how you record, you can end up with the files. You can practice with the files. You can practice with your editing, whatever you want to do. I'm here to serve. I'm here to help, guys, because I know that first few interviews are always the hardest, especially if you've built a podcast based on interviews and you don't have a single episode. Wow, what a mountain to climb. And if I can help you with that first step, I would love to. Reach out to me. How to Podcast series, you can find me. And also your podcast community over on Instagram. Would love to work with you guys. Let me know. Reach out, and thank you. Make sure you please share this podcast with others that are in the process of building a podcast. There are so many podcasts out there on how to do this. A lot of great information, some stuff that's a little bit hard to swallow, a little bit hard to implement. I'm hoping that this podcast is simple and easy for you to implement. That's the idea behind it. Have a great day. We'll talk to you on the next one. Thank you for listening to the How to Podcast series. This is Dave. Take care and enjoy your podcast life. Cheers.